Thank you. Maybe I think someone is going to magically appear with a clicker, maybe. Excellent. my beautiful assistant. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now also like I'd like to thank the sort of Vatican cuisine for the fantastic pasta, and I'm now going to change the subject from carbohydrates to hydrocarbons, and I think maybe the statement I made before is maybe also true about pasta, that maybe what's bad about pasta is not that it's bad, but that it's actually incredibly good. And on that note, I wanted to talk about, I wanted to talk Danish in the Vatican. This word, formgivning, is the Danish word for design. And when you look at it, it really means form giving. Because to design something is to give form to something that has not yet been given form. In other words, it means that we have the power to give form to the future. And that means that when we're designing something, we're actually giving form to the world or part of the world that we would like to find ourselves living in the future. And that's an incredible power and an incredible responsibility. A few examples. I started my career 20 years ago where we designed the Copenhagen harbor bath that extended the life of the city to the water around it. And you know, it became clear, we also designed the one in Aarhus, it became clear at the opening day that a clean harbor is not only nice for the fish, it's amazing for the citizens that live in that city, that they don't have to drive for hours to get to the beach. They can actually jump in the port in the middle of the city. And we thought maybe this is part of something bigger. And we called it hedonistic sustainability. The idea that the sustainable city or the sustainable building is not only better for the environment, but it's also better for the lives of the people that live in it. So we've been spending the last 2 decades pursuing hedonistic sustainability. And I'll give you one other example. This is Copenhill in Copenhagen. It's the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. It's so clean that the steam that you can see coming out of the chimney is actually cleaner than the air of Copenhagen. To celebrate that, to celebrate the marvel of modern engineering and technology that makes, you know, waste turn into energy in the cleanest possible way, we've turned the facade of the power plant into the tallest climbing wall in the world. You need a few skills, but you can climb the facade. It's 100 meters. And if you're too afraid to climb the facade, you can take the elevator inside and you can admire the technology that scrubs the CO2 and filters the particles from the air. And it takes you to a mountain meadow. Denmark has no mountains. So if we would have one naturally, it would look like this. And the funny thing is, like, in the first 2 years, the biodiversity has grown from 60 species that we planted to 120 species that are there now. But maybe more importantly, Denmark won 0 medals in Beijing and in Sochi. We hope to change that statistics because now the Copenhageners can practice at home on mountains that convert the waste of Copenhagen into a resource. But I think what I like about it is that it's in a way a testament to the sort of world-changing power of form giving. That my son is 3.5 years old, and he doesn't know that there was a time when you couldn't ski on the roof of the power plant and you couldn't climb the facade, and it didn't turn the waste into energy. So for him and his entire generation, that's their normal, that's their baseline. So if they have to get wild and creative about giving form to their future, that's where they begin. So fast forward, this is our office after the pandemic began. Like the rest of the world, we went remote, except our model workshop, because we learned that we could use the 3D printers of our model workshop to make emergency medical equipment like face shields and ventilator tubes So we managed to manufacture 25,000 of these items to the local healthcare providers until the supply chain could catch up with the shock. So that gave us this idea that somehow it turned out that the skill set we have in our office just so happened to be applicable to solving one of the biggest problems of that moment in the world, access to emergency medical equipment. So we thought, is there anything else that we can use our knowledge and our professionalism and our skill set to look at? And we thought, instead of going down in scale to make products for the healthcare industry, we thought, could we maybe apply the skill sets and the methodology of architects and planners to make a plan for the entire planet? And that's essentially what we try to do. And in the interest of time, I'll be brief. But the first thing we did was we looked at a number, 173,000 terawatt hours per year. That's the total amount of energy that we spend on Earth as humanity in 1 year. If you look at the last 200 years, we've been burning wood, but then we discovered fossil fuels in the form of coal, oil, and gas. And actually today, the renewables is this tiny layer at the top. So the access to this incredible source of energy has vastly improved the quality of life on all continents. This is just looking at life expectancy, but you can see on every single continent, it has exploded quality of life. But it has a negative side effect. Every year, we emit 50 billion tons of CO2 into the Earth. As a solid block of coal, it would be almost 2 kilometers on each end. This is Manhattan. And every year, we add another one. So we thought, let's look at this in the most tangible way. Today, Asia and especially China are the biggest contributors. But when you look at the last 200 years in aggregate, the West, like Europe and America, have actually been the biggest contributors. It comes from these 4 main sources: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxides, and F-gases. They, of course, come from a wide range of human activities that you can sort of divide into a series of sectors. You can see electricity of heat being the biggest. But for clarity, we've divided this plan for the planet into 5 verticals that deal with greenhouse gas emissions: transportation, energy, industry, food, and waste. But then in addition, if you want to talk about a sustainable human presence on Earth, we have biodiversity, health, pollution with other things than greenhouse gases, human habitat, and access to water. And I'll only speak about the 5 first verticals in this talk. And what is the problem we have to solve? 7.7 billion people with the energy bill. But by 2050, we'll be 10, so it's a bigger problem. And then we thought everybody should have access to the same quality of life as Denmark. So that makes the problem practically twice as hard. And then to really make it simple, we try to then boil it down to the scale of 1 earthling. This is 100 earthlings. 1 million earthlings can fit in a square kilometer. And all of Earth could go to a giant Woodstock concert, 100 by 100 kilometers. This is what 10 billion people take up of space. But we thought, what if instead we divide all of Earth into 10 billion equally sized plots of land, so we can really sort of understand the available resources. So all of you, your equal share of Earth would be 225 by 225 meters. And 2/3 is ocean, 1/10 is like glaciers and mountains and uninhabitable. And the remaining is roughly 1 hectare, and roughly half of it is nature, and the other half is where all the problems come from. It's basically mostly agriculture and a tiny bit of city. Then if we start by looking at energy, energy is like 3/4 of the carbon footprint. It comes from 3 sectors, the energy use. It's buildings, transportation, and industry. We can actually, with existing technologies, very simply electrify all of these industries, which means that we can provide their power with renewable energy. Today, each of you, your equal share in Earth's energy bill is 2/3 of a ton of oil, a ton of coal, and half a ton of gas every year. You can provide the same amount of energy with half wind and half solar in these amounts. And if you want to make it like Denmark, a little bit more wind and a little bit more solar. And then, of course, we need to store the energy. We can store it in batteries and in hydrogen. Hydrogen is an incredible source. It's like you can use it for electricity, green fuels, fertilizer, plastics, biogas, and fuel cells. We already started electrifying half of the biggest problem, which is transportation, and half of that is basically cars. But if you would power a Boeing 747 with batteries, the battery pack would weigh 15,000 tons, making it a little bit hard to fly. And there's a series of industries like shipping and spacefaring. I like that we have the great-grandchild of von Braun here today. So there's a few industries, roughly half of them, where you need hydrogen. And industry, there's some of the emissions come from the power production, so you can electrify it. But part of it is from the chemical processes. And we've all heard that when you burn limestone to create cement, you emit CO2 directly as a chemical process. So we can, of course, replace our materials with low carbon materials, and timber is a great answer because the trees sequester carbon when they grow and you store it in the building. And then there's everything we throw out. And a lot of it is recyclable and produces valuable resources. But a lot of it is actually not that recyclable. And we can gasify it to create biogas, which has the same attributes as natural gas, but it's carbon neutral. And that leaves us to the biggest part of the territory, which is the agriculture, where we make all our sustenance. Rice fields emit methane. Cows, when they burp, emit methane. When we burn the agricultural waste and when we fertilize, we emit nitrous oxide into the atmosphere, a very powerful greenhouse gas. And when we expand our agricultural area and we turn nature into agriculture, the carbon from the soils and the roots emit CO2. And that happens at a pace of 2 square meters per year per person at the current rate. So if we look at it like, this amount of crops is what we produce today to produce biofuels. You can actually create the same amount of energy with this much photovoltaics, so much more efficient. And also, we actually use the same amount of agriculture to produce fuels as we do to feed humans. Instead of burning our agricultural waste, we can gasify it into biogas. We calculated that if Europe would gasify all of their agricultural waste, we could turn off the pipeline from Russia. And then instead of leaving the land fallow, we can have the cattle graze and fertilize the fields, reducing area for dairy farming. And that brings us to the elephant or the cow in the room, which is the fact that a cow burps 100 kilos of methane per year, the equivalent of 108 tons of CO2. To sequester that amount of carbon, you need roughly 1 large tree per ton of CO2 per year. But a cow and a calf needs 2 hectares of grassland, so you can perfectly fit 108 trees on that amount of land. And cows actually love trees. The natural habitat for the large herbivores is what you call silvopasture, the combination of grassland and forestry. So by converting to silvopasture, you get happy cows, you get the trees that sequester the greenhouse gas emissions, and you increase biodiversity. And if we look at agriculture in general, over the last 50 years, the graph on the bottom is the amount of land used for producing cereals, and the graph at the top is the amount of land used to, is the yield of cereals. So you can see that we're doubling our output on the same amount of area. So if we combine the best available technologies with well-proven methods like polyculture and silvopasture, you can actually feed the average earthling instead of with this much area, with this much area. And if you add the renewable power production, you can see that we can perfectly fit comfortably within the footprint that is available, and actually sort of create space for more nature. This would be the 5.5 million people of Denmark. This would be the 330 million people of the United States or all of Earth. And obviously, so you can see that we don't have the limits to growth that we think we have. Often you hear the argument, you know, everybody can't have the same quality of life as the West because Earth can't sustain it. Earth actually can. And also, we are only using available technologies. So it's not like we have to invent uninvented things to deal with it sustainably. We can actually, of course, uninvented things will only make things better. And of course, it's going to happen at different scales. Our homes must be electrified. We must upgrade our envelopes to resist heat loss or heat gain. We must build with carbon-free materials, harvest energy from the sun. We must move between our buildings with different kinds of electric mobility. And we can also very simply make our cities more walkable and more bikeable by making them more green. We must harvest especially the wind and the sun. We must convert waste into a resource to power industry and transportation. And we must make our agriculture more efficient to free up land for nature, to increase biodiversity and to capture the carbon we still emit. And then finally, we need to look at what happens when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. If you look at the wind and solar output of the UK in June, you can see long sunny days and little wind. In January, it's the opposite. But energy demand is very stable. So with batteries and hydrogen storage, we can simply harvest the peak energy when we don't need it and save it for when we do. But before we have that amount of storage, collaboration is a powerful tool. Today, we already distribute energy between us in the form of gas lines and coal and oil. And you can see if we connect the UK site to other sites in Europe, each time you get more connectivity on the grid, you get more stability in terms of supply and demand. So what would be the power of a global grid? Basically, this is the UK solar output over the year. You can see the mountain with a peak in the summer. Cape Town is the opposite. If they're connected, their seasonal variation equal each other out. The same is true when you connect east and west. As you travel west with the sun, there's always peak sun. So a global grid would actually allow us to power the winter with the summer by connecting north to south, and the night with the day by connecting east to west. And maybe to sort of round it off. That's hilarious. I didn't know we had sound on it. So maybe just to say, what's the purpose of a plan for the planet? And you can say, like, it could be amazing in the context of the Vatican or the EU to really do this with the resources. Right now, it's just our own company doing it with the available means we have. But what it has been doing to us, and I think where the true value is that it has given us a clarity and an overview that we didn't have before. So we started using our plan for the planet as a North Star. And every project that we do, we've started aligning it with the principles of the plan for the planet. And I'll just give you a few examples in the end from our practice. Like, we just opened the most eco-friendly factory in the world in Norway. It's made entirely out of locally sourced timber. The big windows are shaded by the trees that are 3 meters from the facade. Not only is it more sustainable, it's also incredibly beautiful as a space. It's powered by local hydroelectricity, and the roof is covered with turf that we simply eliminated from the ground and put it on the roof, and also photovoltaics. Together with a few co-founders, we created a company called Neighbor that uses productization and technology to provide carbon-neutral homes at scale in Silicon Valley, starting with, so again, like entirely out of mass timber, making the homes more beautiful, but also more sustainable, starting with these 3 buildings in San Jose. At Johns Hopkins, we are collecting all of the student activities in a timber village covered with photovoltaics. For all of the different student activities, where again, the wood and the daylight makes the space more beautiful, but also more sustainable. For the European Commission, we are creating the Joint Research Center in Sevilla, which is half a public square and half the building where they work. By shading the square, we make the square more inhabitable, but it also allows us to make the space entirely transparent, so you can see the activity within, because the square is already shaded. And as a result, you create a much more enjoyable space outside and inside, but you also produce twice as much power as you consume. In Milan, we're creating the largest photovoltaic canopy, we believe, in Europe, also creating a public space that is sheltered from the sun and sheltered from the wind, from the rain. And maybe lastly, 2 weeks ago, we just opened these 3 buildings for Google, where the entire facade is proportioned to let in the perfect amount of daylight for the Googlers. And then the kind of beautiful dragon scales on the roof are actually photovoltaics. So every single photon that hits the building is either let in for daylight or turned into power, also using timber for the platforms. So I think all of these are examples that I think I can see that, and I think in a way they show that the sustainable future is not only better for the environment, it's also more beautiful to live in and more fun to work in. But I think maybe most importantly that by really sitting down and using the tools we have as architects and planners and apply it at the scale of our planet, we can create a clarity and an overview that allows ourselves and the companies and organizations that we work with to see the bigger picture. And even if it feels arrogant or megalomaniacal to make a plan for the planet, the absence of a plan has catastrophic consequences. So I think we should actually dare together to give form to a plan for our planet.
Okay, Bjarke, there couldn't have been anyone better than you to wake us up after lunch. But I trust that also your very optimistic vision of what can be done maybe will trigger some comments and cautions. I know we have very little time, but if anyone wants to step forward, here's your chance. Anna?
For me, the important question would be, one, the property regime. Like, I really like that grid that you create, and it's all based on area, and so dividing area equally, you know, the planetary area divided by the total humanity. But then there's the property regime issue. You know, who does the land belong to? Who's grabbing it? Who's accumulating it, concentrating it? And how many landless people are there in the world? So I think that's a parameter that you may want to take into account in your future analysis. And I guess that the other parameter that I would suggest you incorporate in your studies are the mining. Where are all these metals going to come from? Where are the materials, the actual raw materials for the photovoltaics, for everything going to come from? And what are the consequences of that as well on the grand scheme of this ecological system of interrelationships? Because again, I feel that the view from the global south is definitely very different from the view from the global north. And I feel that our optimism derives from very different realms of knowledge and ways of making, and maybe somewhere in between, you know, we can meet.
I think the point is, I mean, I think my optimism comes from the fact that I am optimistic, and I think as a mindset, you say, like, when you hike in the wilderness and you get caught in a snowstorm, the one thing you should not do is give up and fall asleep, because then you will certainly die. So in that sense, to maintain optimism even in the face of adversity is actually the way you survive. And I think the point here is maybe more pragmatism. That I think, you know, like, for instance, like Copenhagen took 10 years to design and plan. We're making a master plan for Toyota. for an experimental city that has a 20-year life, execution phasing. We are 28 or 27 and a half years away from 2050. And there is no plan for the planet. And I think the reason that we have planning tools for things that have to do with the things we build and how we use our territory is because those tools allow us to make decisions and also to attract criticism, because essentially criticism is pointing out the shortcomings of a plan in order to make the plan better. So that's why we have public participation processes when we plan neighborhoods or when we design buildings, so we can attract criticism in the form of opposite points of view, and then we can incorporate those opposite points of view in order to make the plans better. And I think in that sense, of course, we've never applied those tools to the planet, especially because no one has authority and no one has, you know, but I think we somehow need to do it anyway. And I think the first principle, big overviews that they will provide us will also allow us to then zoom in, because it's true that a plan for the planet would end up looking very different in its execution if you're in Dubai or if you're in Ecuador or if you're in Denmark. But by somehow being able to somehow always see that whatever we do at the small scale needs to be in compliance or aligned with what we know are our resources at the large scale, we will somehow have a navigation tool that we don't have today. So I think because we are trying to get, you know, the United Nations has agreed on the, what is it, like 17 Sustainable Development Goals, like almost 200 countries. So there's an incredible agreement, but there's an absence of tools to make it tangible. And I think those tools, we have them in the architecture and urbanism profession, and we should just basically apply them at the scale of the planet.
First Joachim von Braun, then Brigitte Mohn, and then Andrea Gebhardt.
Thank you. I completely agree with your feasible optimism on land use change, food and agriculture. My question relates to the matrix. Can you share some comparative metrics of, say, the Google building, etc., life cycle, environmental footprints on all scores, with sort of the standard buildings of offices which we have today? So, what metrics do you use in order to be convinced?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I must confess, like my colleague Alawa, that you know, are all the buildings we do carbon neutral in both operation and in embodied carbon? The answer is no. But a few of them we've reached that level, and I would say we have become more committed by actually doing the work on the plan for the planet, by seeing things at the big scale. But for instance, I do think I've been a skeptic of systems like BRIAM and LEED, just because they seem a little bit like putting a medal. And you know, what does LEED Gold mean, apart from the fact that it's clearly better than silver and not quite as good as platinum, right? But so in that sense, I think we need some harder metric. But the good thing about these point systems is like the factory in Norway is entirely carbon neutral, both in embodied carbon and in operations in the life cycle analysis. And there we aim for BREEAM Platinum. And of course, because the client was committed to reaching that goal, we had moments where the client had to take, because I think the truth is that in the long perspective, in the long-term view, there is no added cost to building sustainably, but there is in the short term. So you will have to make some extra investments in the short term that will pay themselves off by reducing the energy bill and you know, water usage, et cetera, like various kinds of costs. And I think those point systems helped the client to double down on their hard goals and spend the extra money. And in that sense, I think the best thing that we can do on a kind of governmental level is to try to find ways to make sustainability not an anecdotal soft issue, because it's so easy to highlight all the good things with the building, like, look, there's photovoltaics, look, there's green roof, look. But then, like, you're asking for the harder metrics. And I think if we can make the environmental performance of the operating and the embodied carbon of a building such a hard, accountable and accounting that you can measure it with the other hard account that we have, which is the budget, then if you can make it a hard issue, it's going to be much easier to make it something that people will have to provide, not just as part of their public relations messaging, but part of the hard-working performance of the building. So I think this is really where the new European Bauhaus can also give everybody a tool, because I think the industry is longing to be able to commit more to environmental performance, but they don't want it, they want to do it on equal terms. They want their competitors to be as committed as they are so that they compete on equal terms. And I think the only way to do that is to come up with very comparable and accountable measures for the environmental performance.
Later in this session, could I ask maybe Brigitte and Andrea to ask the questions one after each other, and then... Okay, so, but we still have Brigitte then to the question.
I think it would be great if you could use the media competence and the innovation to do a sustainable Minecraft prototype, right? And we were asked about the data and the innovation and how can it serve to the common good. If people know that you're there, they will create with you, but they don't know you. And I think that's super, super important that you get out and basically open up not only to the public, but to co-creators. And I think that if you talk to Epic Games and all these other guys who are basically on it, I think it will be interesting and on a more, and I think we have to think about different ways of co-creation. And the other thing is you should definitely talk to the people of the G7 Impact Investing Task Force. They work in 37 countries, and I think that they would be a good source to spread the word.